Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Deconstructors Club. We could call it a Christmas edition. I'm your host, Alex Weiss, with our co-host, Bob Azarito, and we're excited to have you all with us, tuning in, listening, and we're kind of here in the Christmas spirit. So
Trying to be.
Yeah, so we're trying to be.
Yeah.
And what I mean by Christmas spirit, in essence, is not like all the gifts and lights and shopping and shopping and shopping, but mainly on our subject we want to talk about. We want to touch a little bit on the Christmas story and what it means to us personally, and then we can get into, what it means really biblically. What it means by, what does it mean by biblically? So we need to talk about those things. But anyways, Bob, how you doing?
I'm doing fine. Yeah. So Christmas is here. I mean, a week away. And we've been doing a lot of important things up to now in this season. We got through an election and talked a little bit about some ramifications. So we thought that maybe we would shift our attention just briefly to the time of year it is. And Christmas, I suppose, is one of the most important holidays of the year and even worldwide.
Right.
And so, and a lot of churches now are involved in telling the story. They have the Christmas pageants where there's the children who are acting out the story. And so we thought it might be nice to talk a little bit about how our deconstruction has affected our view of this story. It's almost like a sacred story. It is this sacred story. But what I mean by sacred like don't touch it with your deconstruction.
Right.
Like if you begin to question it or think about it or wonder about it or alter some of what you think about it or believe about it, you are sometimes criticized because how could you do this to the Christmas story? So we wanted to sort of unpack some of that today a little bit.
Right. And we're not trying to be Grinches or Scrooges here.
Hopefully.
Bah humbug.
Hopefully. Right. But there's room, I think, in this topic for conversation around deconstruction, because I think we've changed some of our views about this, and maybe some of our listeners have also.
Because, when you're talking about deconstruction, I always remember telling my wife years ago, I said, if we're going to deconstruct, we need to put everything on the table.
Absolutely.
Are we going to believe? I mean, we can't just say we're going to only believe this or not believe this anymore, but still believe this.
Yeah.
We have to question it all. Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with questioning everything.
Right. And we're hoping that the deconstruction process leads to the reconstruction that makes these beliefs bigger and fuller and more meaningful to us. Right. That's the ultimate goal.
Well, the heart of it isn't like we want to lead people to, in essence, atheism. Not that that's bad or wrong. For some people have to go through that type of journey, and we're not criticizing that at all. I have friends that are atheists and have deconstructed, because of evangelical beliefs and what they used to, hold dearly or adhere to. But some of them are actually circling back into faith in different ways, in different manners, but they're reconstructing. Some people have to actually go that direction to reconstruct again into faith.
We've talked about that already. Even last season, we talked about how you go through that valley of letting go of certain beliefs in order to recreate and rebuild something that is actually more true to what you really think. And Christianity, in its development early on especially, had a lot of atheism in it.
Right.
They were even accused of being atheist originally because they didn't believe some of the current sort of ways of thinking about God and deities and this sort of thing. So we can't be afraid of unbelief if we're going to do deconstruction well. Right. We can't be afraid of it. And so we're going to bring that sort of spirit of questioning to this story today.
I find it so funny because when you're talking about that, the fear that it causes Christians when you use the word deconstruction, right now they're attacking it.
I've noticed that.
Platforms are coming after it. I've noticed that. And calling it demonic and calling it, all kinds of bad stuff.
Yeah.
Right? And it's so interesting because I really don't think God's really bending over backwards or completely upset about someone deconstructing and questioning their faith. No ways at all. Because in the Bible, there's been cycles of deconstruction. And in history, there's been cycles of deconstruction. And in those cycles, they really bring us to more of a pure faith, because we get to take out all of, the thorns, and you clear out, the brush, and really see what's really there. What we were talking about earlier, there is a narrative there.
Yeah.
That influenced the story. We talked about that earlier. But
Yeah.
not on this episode.
Right.
Pre-episode.
Yeah.
We were already discussing this.
Yeah. We do a lot of talking off camera and
Right.
off video and audio. But for someone to deconstruct, even to bother with that, it means their faith is extremely important to them.
Exactly.
Not the opposite.
You're taking
not
it very
like
serious.
faith is, just throw. Hey, if people are going to throw faith away, they're not going to bother with the concept or the process of deconstruction. They're just going to walk away.
Exactly.
And which is an option. We do have free choice to do that. But if anybody's going to really spend time thinking about faith,
Right.
asking questions about faith,
Right.
doubting their faith, struggling with faith, that means that faith is it's very important to them in their life. And they're trying to figure out, they're trying to be honest about what they think about it. They don't want a fake faith.
Right.
They don't want a pretend faith. Right. They want something that really is reflective of who they are and what they believe.
And to me, that's truly a purifying of the faith.
It's supposed to be.
Because,
absolutely,
the way we used to think, purifying of the faith was all these personal sins that you're going through, and that's that. You just repent, ask for forgiveness, you're ready to go. When you're deconstructing, you're literally purifying your faith, because there's so many dogmas and beliefs that actually hold you back.
It might even be an act of faith. Deconstruction might actually be an act of faith, because you believe that behind and through the deconstruction, there's something better.
Right.
There's something that can hold true, and you can find it through this process of deconstruction.
Paul, I know we're probably going off subject, because we have to come back to Christmas, and we will. We promise. But, Paul went through his deconstructing after his experience with meeting Christ, on the road to Damascus. He didn't just go right away and go preach.
He had to figure it out.
There was like 2 years in between.
A lot of time.
It was a lot of time. And he realized that, you know what? I have this wrong. He came to a realization on that road to Damascus where it's like, okay, I have been talking stuff and believing stuff and pushing stuff down people's throats that basically is faulty. It's not matching up or aligning to what I just experienced. And it's always the experiences that are going to change the way you believe. Right. And that led him to 2 years of deconstructing.
You might even say that those who are both resistant to deconstruction and even angry about deconstruction are the ones who are exhibiting a lack of faith.
Right.
Because what they're saying is, oh, no, our faith can't hold up to questioning faith. Our faith can't hold up to examination and to doubting. We have to protect it from those who might want to question.
Then if you're going to be protecting your faith that much, then that means your faith is weak.
It's weak.
And if it's not as well, it's feeble, because it's not so foundational that you don't have to be protecting it or arguing about it. Those that have to protect it and argue about it because they feel that it's not enough.
Like I got to do something
about
this. What if somebody finds out something about the
right?
Why is there so much fear around deconstruction? Deconstruction ought to be enthusiastically pursued, because it means that someone is trying to get to something that's more accurate or more believable or more true to who they are and to what they really think. We shouldn't be afraid of deconstruction.
Right.
And unfortunately, a lot of people who are angry about deconstruction are afraid that the process will undermine faith to the point of creating something that is that's to be feared or or we're to worry about.
Right.
And I understand that there is that part of evangelicalism, which is the part of evangelicalism that we've been trying to question,
Right.
which is this fear of honesty and honest questions. Why? Please ask yourself this question, everyone. Why are we afraid of people asking honest, deep questions about faith?
Right.
Why should we be afraid of that? And I know for a long time, I was afraid of it because I was told that it would lead to really bad things.
Mm-hmm.
And in time, I couldn't, even though I was told that it would lead to bad things, I couldn't resist it any longer. The questions were too foundational and too important. And what I discovered was deconstruction was not something to be feared.
Mm-hmm.
It was something to go into bravely and with faith, that as a result of the honest process, something good would come out of it.
And, you know, all of us, like, for instance, I just mentioned Paul and his Damascus experience, you know, or on the road to Damascus. We all have to go through something. There's got to be something that just clicks for us and says, okay, there's more to this than what I am right now experiencing. I know for a fact that I felt limited in my thinking. My mind has not been truly opened even so much more to experience life, experience God, experience people. And so there's things that click for people. For me, it was education. For me, it was looking at the Bible. I had never looked at it fully in an academic way. I always looked at it in a theological way, meaning that my narrative, or the narratives that I was given, was the ones that were the ones that basically defined the story. My narrative defined the story, not the ancient narratives. And when I started studying academically, then I started studying the ancient narratives, and it completely changed me and transformed me in such a way that I was like, this saved my life. This saved me to a point where what I held so dearly was basically a concept or concepts that came from modernism, modern evangelicalism, and not really from, you know, how the ancient texts were and were even viewed, how they're viewed now in such a way that, you know, such a holy book, you know, that we get to the point of the doctrines of infallibility and inerrancy, and yet that's not the way the primitive church looked at it.
No.
Dogmas weren't what reigned in the day. It was more, the stories were, because the narrative, we were talking about that earlier, their narrative was narrative of compassion, a narrative of love, a narrative of, I was, you know, a friend of mine had put up a book that he's, you know, basically a book that he's reading. A historian was talking about the difference between this disparity between the Roman Empire and, you know, our nation right now, right? And where 16% were of the wealthy and the rest weren't in the Roman Empire. Here, it's only 1%. But even though there's greater disparity, there are some social programs still in place that help people, even though that needs to be a way better system. But there are some. In the Roman Empire, they had none. So there were some emperors that basically allowed the church to be the programs that would care for the poor. I mean, they weren't directly the empire's programs, but they would allow them to be those. So the church was known for the way it cared for the poor. That's how it became so big. The way it cared for the sick, the way it cared for the poor, that was the narrative of the church. So when the writings came, the stories came, it was their narrative that was coming through in the stories that they were writing. Either it be the Gospels that we're talking about, and we're about to talk about, you know, the birth of Christ and so forth. All of these stories were reflecting the narrative of the church back then. So now we have our own narrative, because we're far from the narrative of the ancient church, sadly. We're not known for caring for the poor. We're not known for caring for the sick. We're not known for these social programs, if they want to call it, you know, nowadays. And it's so funny. On the contrary, we're anti-social programs for the most part. Evangelicalism is. But yet that was how the church was defined back in the day. So these are the kind of things that, for me, as I discovered these, saw the disparity of basically how far we are from what the primitive church really believed, their narrative, and how it wasn't so important for them how aligned things were. They didn't write these stories so that they can be historical documents. They wrote these stories so that their narrative could be known to the generations to come.
Well, and even the doctrines of infallibility and inerrancy and these things, they fit right into a fear tactic. So we say those things so that people won't question, won't use their brains, won't actually go in and find out what does this story mean? Why was it told? These sorts of things. We just created a shield almost around the Bible so that it's just a stark structure that we just ascribe to.
Right.
But if you begin to question it or think about it or wonder about it, all of a sudden, you're in danger. And so many of those doctrines were created as a way to prevent people, because there was a fear almost to protect the one approach that we're trying to protect.
That is the key.
About the
Scripture. One approach. When you start arguing over infallibility and inerrancy, that means somebody is this group of people are going to control the narrative.
And believe there's only one way to look at it.
Exactly. One way to look at it. They're going to control, again, the narrative of the story. It's their narrative of the story. It's not really the narrative of the story.
Right. And that's what happens when we create this sort of infallibility around a document. And we even acknowledge the fact that the infallibility and inerrancy is about the original autographs. We even say that as because we know we can't use all these translations and all this. We know it's changed through the years, but yet, we don't have the original autographs. We have a very small portion of the original autographs. So why are we talking
some of them aren't matching up?
Why are we even talking about the inerrancy of original autographs if we don't have them? So it becomes almost a moot point to try to claim that,
right.
and then it keeps us from exploring the thing that you and I want to explore today,
right.
which is, what about this Christmas story?
Right.
And why was it developed as it was developed? And what does it mean that this was the story that was told? And so in a way, to question it, of course, we can sometimes get accused of undermining this very simple romantic story that we use for children's pageants. And of course, we wouldn't want to do that any more than we want to undermine any of the other stories that come with Christmas or these holidays. But it's important to talk about it because there's something that's being missed when we believe that the story, the details of the story, is the important part, rather than what the story was meant to tell us,
right.
the narrative that it was meant to communicate. And so I think we want to talk about that a little bit today, because it's kind of gotten off base a little bit. And of course, our deconstruction included some of these aspects of the story and its meaning.
Right. And one of the controversies, which shouldn't be, but the consensus of scholars, have investigated so much over the Luke rendition of the story, in particular, the historical, basis of it in the beginning. Well, many of them are talking about it doesn't match up, it doesn't align historically. What does this mean to us? Does it have to align historically for us to actually believe the narrative of that story? In other words, there's something that the church was trying to communicate to us. They weren't trying to be so accurate in their history, because again, these are not historical documents. Mm-hmm. And, these were, and then some people even believe, I don't say some people, but some scholars actually even believe that the beginning of the story of the birth of Christ was actually added afterwards, because most of the Gospels did not have that. So this was like maybe 100 or the going into the second century that this part of the story was added. So right now, what we're even saying right now, people are flipping. I mean, as an evangelical would have flipped because I was an evangelical and I flipped when I would hear certain things like this. It's like, no way, that can't be. What is it? But the whole point, though, is that, again, when we look at Scripture without that infallibility and inerrancy dogma, and we can open our minds to understand that the writers weren't trying to be, historically accurate. What they were trying to do is communicate to us a narrative that's important instead of the details of it.
So here's the thing. Let's say that we were going to wonder about some of the historicity of the Christmas story. Was it in Bethlehem? Did they travel all that way because of the census? Right. Did they? Was Jesus born in a barn, in a manger? Was Jesus virgin born? Mm-hmm. A lot of the details of the story, and as you begin to question some of those facts, people get alarmed and very concerned by questioning them. Mm-hmm. And why do you think that is? Why do you think that we say that, no, you've got to believe all of those facts as being historically accurate in order to claim that you believe in the Bible? Right. I mean, what is the connection about those historic facts and what we want to say that we believe about Jesus and the good news?
It's interesting. Before studying the Scripture in an academic way, I would always hear people pull out these conspiracy things of, they copied, what was it? The Egyptian narrative, or they copied some other narrative of virgin birth and deity, right? Mm-hmm. Virgin birth and needed to be a virgin birth so it can be a deity. Mm-hmm. And I used to always question that too, or hear it. And I was like, well, they're lying. They can't be correct. They don't all lie. But when going into academic study, that was the world that they lived in. Yeah. To deify who they needed to deify, a lot of them had to be connected to this type of virgin birth. And so that they can claim. Now, I know probably people are listening here and say, are you saying then that was Christ's virgin birth or not? I can't tell you yes or no because the Bible is not a historical document. But I can tell you that in those days, to really put a stamp of approval in the sense of this is our religion, they needed their deity in their religions. It's not like you're looking at Buddhism or something, nowadays, but back in the day, it was like they needed the stamp of deity. So the stamp of deity had to be virgin birth and of course, some type of miracles and signs and wonders. So that's kind of the narrative that they had to fit Jesus in. And either it was accurate or not. What are we saying here? Do we believe in it or not believe in it? The whole point for them wasn't either you believe it or not, dogma, it's true or not true. For them, it's like, this is the narrative that we believe in. Mm-hmm. This is the God, the deity that we believe in, amongst many others, but this is the one that we believe in. So we're going to preach him. This is who we're going to preach. And this Savior is a Savior that's compassionate and caring to the poor. And, the disenfranchised. So there's this narrative. Now, do we want to say that it's 100% accurate, 50% accurate? I don't know. But I can tell you that in the ancient times, that was their narrative. Do we actually need now? See, and I always grew up with this. In, what was it? The evidence that demands a verdict and all.
Josh
McDowell. And I used to
more evidence, because the first evidence wasn't enough. We had to write another book called More Evidence because the first about it wasn't.
It didn't convince enough, I guess.
It didn't convince enough people. We needed more evidence to finally convince everyone.
And so these apologetic books, that's what they are. The apologetic books, apologetics. I was always thinking when, hearing them years ago, who are we arguing against, really? Why do we have to prove these things? they're not going to save the masses like they believe it will. They're not going to convince the masses. Like, basically what the people are looking for in a savior isn't, okay, give me the evidence. I need to see the evidence of, was he virgin birth? I need to see the evidence of. No, people are struggling day to day, especially the marginalized, especially the disenfranchised, especially those that have been oppressed, especially those, they don't care a hoot about those things. For them, it's like, that Jesus stands for us. That Jesus, is in solidarity with us. That Jesus came to bring liberation to. I want to follow that Jesus instead of saying, here's all the evidence. But I think that in some ways, all of that kind of thinking is more of what one of the scholars called a privileged a way of thinking, more of a privileged way of thinking. Well, you can debate and discuss in your halls all of these evidences or non-evidences or however the situation is, can shoot holes through it anyway, no matter what, because you're bringing your narrative to it. But the question here is, what was the narrative that they believed in those times? And according to history, it reflects that Christians were known for those that cared for the sick, cared for the poor, not that argued for dogmas, crystallizing belief systems to include and exclude whoever they wanted.
All you have to do is look at the early church and find out what narrative was the overarching narrative of that early community.
Right.
And that early community was evidenced as a community that loved and cared for people in need.
Right.
And if you read Acts, you can find out who it was that was joining that community. It was a community of love. Right. It was a community of inclusion and a community of welcome. Yep. They didn't gather around some,
belief system and dogma.
A story of factuality about, they just knew that the reality of acceptance and justice and kindness to all was the foundation of their gatherings, of their community.
They started off by sharing everything that they had.
Shared, and that you can't miss it in Acts, that they brought their goods together to share among each other.
To give to those that were in need, to give to those that were in need. First, it started in their community. Then years later, it started in the empire. That's how it spread. And a lot of people think, okay, a lot of people that came to become Christians, it was because of the preachings no, it was because of how they cared. How they cared for the sick, how they cared for the poor, how they cared for the needy. That started within their own community, that the people, it says in the book of Acts, the people were so impressed, so impacted by how they cared, that they were added to the group. Meaning, I want to be a part of that group.
Right. That's
genuine right there. Those are people. Right. I'm sick and tired of this empire and the way it's been in rejecting, those that were, of course, the servants, the slaves, which 60% of them were. All of these, what is it called? Unjust ways that they treated the poor. You find a group of people that they prioritize the poor. That doesn't sound like the modern church, by the way.
All of a sudden,
that does not sound like the modern church.
Something happened in this early community that made them believe that just because you were poor didn't mean you were unimportant. Mm-hmm. That just because you were poor didn't mean that you could be treated any way people wanted to treat you. Just because you were poor or you didn't meant you didn't have any rights. Right. Just because you were poor meant that you could be enslaved. And all of a sudden, people realized that poverty or disenfranchised conditions didn't mean that you were expendable. Mm-hmm. And so how is it that this early church began to reflect the values of Jesus?
Right.
They began to gather around these values that at the time were just dismissed by the religious authorities in that day. Jesus caring for the outcasts, caring for the lepers, caring for the Samaritans, caring for those who were viewed as outside.
See what you're saying right there. That's the narrative.
That was the narrative.
So when they wrote the stories, which they didn't write the stories right immediately. It was almost the second century.
Absolutely.
That they wrote these stories because they reflected and highlighted the narrative that they were already living.
So what do you think the narrative was that they wanted the story of Jesus's birth to reflect?
Right.
That's the question.
Right.
The question isn't, let's prove that Jesus was born of a virgin, as if you could prove that.
Right.
Let's prove. And so the only way they can prove it, these writings are infallible.
Right.
These writings are inerrant. Well, that's not a proof. Right. That's just this sort of overarching kind of claim.
And you're missing the point.
You're missing
the point because it's not even fully about that. I mean, although they are making a point that this is our deity in the sense, but what they're saying too is look at how he came born in a manger.
Look what this leader is representing. Exactly. Yes, because he all of a sudden we're telling this amazing story about a poor family from this poor, forgotten, out of the way place called Nazareth, or out of the way place called Israel, from these oppressed people, oppressed by Rome, not given any rights, tax up to 90 or 95% of their income given to empire, as opposed to, and just kept in poverty because of the unjust sort of ways of treating people. And this family gave birth to in a lowly stable, among the sheep and the animals, being treated like animals.
But that's beside the point. It was a virgin birth. So
and then who comes then heralded by angels and visited by shepherds and all these amazing things. What it's saying is, even the poorest of the poor are honored in their birth. What if that's the message of Christmas? The message of Christmas isn't, oh, look at this king and this ruler and this amazing. Well, it's not paying attention to the facts, because the facts are this is an oppressed family. We know that is true. Giving birth to a poor child in a place that is the bed of animals, and this now represents a new narrative, and the new narrative that it represents is that there is no birth of any human anywhere that isn't valuable and significant and worthwhile and treasured.
Let me ask you a question. I'm not going off point here, but it's just an interesting question because of what you're bringing up. Do you believe that most Americans live better than Jesus?
Absolutely. Absolutely. No question. And his whole community and his whole.
And because of that, do you believe that if Jesus would walk the streets of America, would anybody actually recognize him?
Not.
Absolutely
not.
He would miss him.
He's the lowliest of the lowly. This is the whole point of the Christmas story. What you're asking, those questions reflect exactly the point. And yet, I'll guarantee you, very few people will be hearing that story, that narrative on Christmas morning. From the homilies of most preachers.
That's true.
That is not the message.
That is true. Can you imagine in every home there's some type of nativity scene, either it be a small one, either it be on an ornament on the tree, and we all think this is the narrative of Jesus. We would completely miss the true narrative.
And you know what's causing us to miss it? It's the details of the story that have caused us to miss the point of the story, because all we focus on, virgin birth, prophecies from days ago, Bethlehem,
every year you hear sermons like that. It's confirming he is the Christ to come.
He is the Christ, so bow down and obey him. Now here's the thing. I'd like to talk about what obedience to Jesus really means, but we'll pass on that for just a moment. But it's the details of the story. Our insistence that he must have been born in Bethlehem. He must have been born of a virgin. Right. He must have been, God among us. He must be all of these things because of that, and because of that insistence, we don't even talk about, why was this story told? Why do we even have this story? Mm-hmm. What was the purpose? What was the reason this story was given? And now you may not come up with the same thing we're coming up with. It was given because of this narrative of God's love for all people, even the poorest and the most disenfranchised among us. Well, you may not come up with that, but you need to come up with something. What story? What was so important that we needed to tell this story of this poor person's birth in a stable? Mm-hmm. What was so important? And I know that for me, in my growing up years, the only story I ever was told was that I had to believe in these fantastical things surrounding this narrative. Mm-hmm. The birth story, the facts. Right. And if I didn't believe them, you know what would happen? I was out. Yeah. I was out, because we all accepted the fact that if we didn't believe that it happened the way we're told it happened, then we were not accepted in the group. And the whole narrative, the true narrative, is the opposite of that. Right. Because it's providing God's love and acceptance to all humans, no matter who they are or where they were born.
And the nativity scene is so glorified. People can't even come close to imagining what that scene looked like. From the stable, from the smells, from a baby being born there, from, I know there's different, I don't want to go into that, but there's different takes of, was it actually a barn or not? And, there's other different takes, but it still was not a pleasant experience.
The writers who wrote the story were trying to say this was not a glorified situation. Right. This was a humble, almost embarrassing situation for a baby to be born in such conditions.
Right. And it's funny because we're talking about, the consensus, academic consensus. Did the story actually happen or not? And the whole point, though, is it was written.
It was written and it was told.
It was told because there's a narrative that the church, primitive church, wanted you to know. And not the point that you're making it now. It's the point that they were trying to make back then to us.
Yeah. It's not that Jesus was a Caesar.
Right.
It's not that he was born of royal line, even though we make a big thing out of that as well. Not that he was the son of David, and not that wasn't the primary reason it was given. It was given so that you would see that whatever's meant by this royalty or whatever's meant by the son of David is that title is given to the poorest of the poor, the most pushed out, the most excluded. That's where you would find the son of David, and the
narrative never changed. It continued to be him amongst them, him with them, him defending them, him dying for them.
Absolutely.
All the way through and through. There is a narrative. How are we seeing that narrative now? And that was what was a big part of my own deconstruction, is the fact that the Christian narrative does not fit. Mm-hmm. The evangelical narrative does not fit the primitive church narrative, not even close.
No.
Because the Jesus that they want is glamorized Jesus. The Jesus that they want is a Jesus of prosperity. The Jesus that they want, or that they claim, I should say, not that they want, that they claim, is one that requires your obedience and requires your submission and requires, the lordship. Yet something very different over here in the narrative of the primitive church.
Yeah, and I'm pretty convinced that the narrative of the primitive church was all are included.
Right.
All belong. It wasn't.
It's to love everyone.
It's to love everyone. It's to have
not
no
to
barriers.
Beat people into submission that Jesus is Lord, and if you don't repent, he's going to come and you're going to
and that's punished. The upside down result of what happens, because very soon these stories that were meant to invite, to include, to broaden the embrace,
right,
were now used to exclude, to keep people out, to barricade people off. Because now, if you didn't believe certain things about the details of that story, you were no longer included. And yet the original narrative told the story originally so that there was nobody who wouldn't feel included.
Yeah,
so that everyone...
Even to include people that were not even from the Jews.
Absolutely.
When the wise men came... And on top of that, they did not follow the religion.
They were Zoroastrian.
They
did not. And so the
They're
idea
considered pagan.
was breaking down all of the walls. All of the walls were broken down. And yet what we did was we built walls with the story that was meant to tell you that all the walls were broken down. All the walls were broken down. Let's take that story that was told so that you would know that all the walls were broken down. Let's take that story and build up higher walls around the story.
Yeah, because we gotta protect it. There's got to be conditions. Oh, but then again, we're saved by grace, so there's no conditions. But there's got to be conditions.
And all of a sudden,
it's always been a conditional
grace
gospel.
Into law. We turned this story of grace and love into a story of preconditions and law.
Right.
And now all of a sudden, we're barricaded off. If we can't say that this is exactly the way it happened, it's like
it's not a true gospel if it's excluding people. How is that how is that good news? If you would come and tell me good news is for for these things that are gonna happen, but for your benefit. But then there's other things that
because
it's not gonna work for you.
It's because we turned the good news into a conditional proposition.
Right.
We turned it. We turned it the good news into only if. And as soon as you make it only if, then all of a sudden it's no longer grace.
Right.
It's now a condition. And if you don't meet the conditions, I'm sorry, you can't belong. If you don't meet the conditions now is, what does it even mean to believe in the virgin birth? What that it happened?
Right.
What does that even, what does it even mean? Because if I believe in the virgin birth, does that change my life anyway?
And that's the point. That's the point that I'm trying to make, is how important those beliefs are when they're not the focal point of what the narrative is about. That we have made it the focal point because Westernized Christianity is so hung up on dogma beliefs. That's the reason why we have so many denominations, because nobody agrees, because everybody has their own point of view, and their own point of view is the best one.
Look, all I was taught growing up was dogma.
That's me too.
It was called theology. It wasn't theology. It was dogma. It didn't even make sense. They would say it's free, it's by grace, by faith alone, and then they would give you all these conditions.
Right.
Well, how can it be free by grace, by faith, and give you conditions?
Right.
How is that even possible? And if it's conditional, then it's not grace. This is the whole point of Galatians. Paul spent all of his time basically writing to all of these churches, trying to make sure they understood the difference between conditional law and loving faith and grace.
Right.
it continues to get messed up because exactly this. We can take anything and turn it into law.
And we're good at it.
We're so good at it. All of a sudden, here's a list of things you've got to do or believe, or God won't accept you. God won't love you. Yeah. God won't receive you.
You know, it's so interesting you say that, because I growing up, I would get so hung up even with Christians growing up. Why? Every time I assumed that I met a good Christian, a nice person, there was always conditions. But I used to blame them, but then I found out it's not about them. It's really about what they believe. They literally believe these things. And because they believe these things, that is what forms their actions. So in many ways, they seem like they're welcoming. They seem like they're kind. But the moment you start getting into deeper relationship, then you start finding out there are these conditions. There are these conditions that you have to go through for you to feel approved by them, accepted by them. So it's insane, because almost in every group you find these ways over and over and over and over. And so, yet again, they don't fit the narrative of the primitive church. Mm-hmm. It's interesting, because I want you to meet a friend of mine, and I'm hoping that he's going to be able to be here in this in one of our episodes. But he was talking about this, and I know it sounds kind of radical, but I kind of agree with him. He said, I think that many people talk about the church needs to be reformed, right? Reform the church, reform. He's like, I actually think that the church needs a start over. I think that the church right now needs to die and a new one needs to be born that actually reflects what it's supposed to reflect. The compassion, the all-inclusive love, all of those things, the no preconditions. He said none of that fits, because you have denominations that proclaim or declare that they're loving and progressive and so forth. Yet they're very capitalistic still. Mm-hmm. They don't want to let go of their buildings. They don't want to let go of their stocks. They don't want to let go of their... Yet you're talking about, well, we got to do something about the poor. You definitely can. Mm-hmm. Well, we got to do something about, or we believe in caring for the poor. We believe we do this, we do that. But still, are you doing enough? Why are you not doing enough? Because there are conditions. Oh, we can't share everything. Our buildings, we can't share all of our buildings, we can't do those kind of things. We can't share. Well, we can't just give money out like that. I mean, we give money out like that, a certain limit, but we just can't share. So we have to ask ourselves a question. When are we ever going to get to that point that really reflected the primitive church, that reflected the narrative of Christ? That's the spirit of Christmas. We don't have it. We don't have it.
It begins by understanding the narrative of Jesus. Mm-hmm. I mean, until we recognize that the narrative of Jesus was this kind of compassion that doesn't make excuses, right, that doesn't limit, that doesn't set people aside. And I understand. I think it's hard to look at the world and see the 256 million refugees and immigrants who are wandering the globe looking for a home. Right. It's hard to look at that and say, what am I supposed to do about that?
Right.
But at least if you ask that question, you're opening the door to what we could be caring about as a church, instead of protecting our status or protecting our privilege or even defining Christianity as a privileged religion.
And in this country,
over against other religions,
it most definitely is. And when they start chirping about, religious freedoms and, what they really mean is we want to continue our supremacy. We don't want to let room for other religions.
Well, there are people who believe that Christianity is the superior religion.
Oh, definitely.
And believe that by acting upon that, we can bring the kingdom that Jesus was trying to bring
Christian nationalism we talked about,
into the world.
Right.
And what you realize is that wasn't Jesus's narrative.
Nope.
That wasn't the way Jesus operated. Nope. Jesus operated under the banner of inclusion,
of love, of peace,
for all,
of humility, laying down your life for others.
For others. And that everyone, every human was included in God's loving embrace.
Right.
And if we think that there's a special inclusion for those that think certain things,
right.
and if you think certain things in certain ways about Jesus, that somehow sets you apart as special, then we are no longer following Jesus.
Yeah.
And so the story, this amazingly humble story, was turned into a privileged story.
And that's what happens when you are the privileged group in society. Your narrative has to fit your privilege. Your narrative has to fit your power. It can't fit the other way around, which back in the day, the primitive church was not the group in privilege or in power.
It was a story that was subversive and countercultural.
That's right.
It was a story that you'd have to whisper it to really be.
It was radical. It was controversial.
It was upending.
Yeah.
It was a story that was a poor Jewish family became this leader of a new narrative, a new way of viewing humanity.
Right. That's great.
It was because up to then that privilege was protected, and now all of a sudden this story and all the other stories just exploded this new way of looking at the world. And that's what we fail so often to notice in these stories. And that's why we, that the powers that be tend to barricade them off and protect them.
By dogmatizing them.
Dogmatizing them, protect them against deconstructors who would come along and say, well, that doesn't make sense. That's not a new story. There's nothing about that story that's new. It just says now there's a new group that's privileged rather than that group that's privileged. It's not the Romans anymore that's privileged. It's now the Christians that are privileged. And it's taking that story and, ruining it in terms of what it was really there to communicate to us.
Well, I know we can talk about this forever. Our time's pretty much up, but I want us to talk about, I know we have one more episode before Christmas, if I'm not mistaken. There should be one more, and it would be good to kind of expound a little bit more on, especially the refugee side of Christ. Now that you mentioned the refugees, it would be cool to be able to mention that side and kind of talk a little bit about that.
Jesus is at the border.
Yeah. That's where
Jesus is at
he's
the
the one that's
border.
being rejected.
He's the
asylum seeker.
He's the asylum seeker.
And let's talk about that the next time. So, because I think that's powerful. Again, who he represents.
That's what we're missing in this amazing story. Yeah, that's what that's why the story has just been relegated to children's pageants. And by the way, I love children's pageants. But when it's relegated to just children's pageants, let's get who's going to play baby Jesus. When we relegate it just to that, we lose the power of that story.
It's good. It does. We make it just a children's program. And that's it. We make it a children's pageant, a children's program.
Nothing wrong with that.
No, I'm not against it. Exactly. Like, we're not against it. But the problem is that when we only relegate it to that.
Exactly.
And we don't really bring forth the realities of this story. So we need to do that. We'll be back again for our next episode before Christmas.
Yeah,
it is.
It is.
And we'll do our second episode of our Christmas edition, and we'll talk a little bit about that. I think it's going to be good.
Yep.
All right. Hey, it was good having you all with us. Again, check us out. We're on Spotify, of course, Apple, our podcast, YouTube, you can see us. But also check us out on our social media. Leave comments, likes. I know our TikTok has a good following. I appreciate that. We need more people to follow us on TikTok. We need more followers. We need more followers on our social media on Instagram and also Facebook. But leave us a note, especially on YouTube. You're listening to us, or send us an email, however the situation is. We would love to hear from you, hear how this has blessed you, how this has helped you along the way of your deconstruction journey. So thanks for being with us, and happy holidays.
Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.